Today's topic is cover crops. I have grown vegetables for decades without giving a thought to cover crops. A few years ago, I learned about them and began to experiment. Now that I have seen firsthand how they work, I'm excited to share these superpowers with you. Today's session will help you understand the benefit of cover crops, become familiar with many commonly used cover crops, and learn when and how to sow seeds and when and how to terminate the crops. And cover crops can offer many benefits, and they include adding organic matter to our soil. Legume will supply nitrogen. They'll protect soil from compaction and suppress weeds. They can recycle nutrient to prevent leaching, protect soil from erosion, and also provide food for pollinators and many other beneficial insects. So at this point, I ask you to think for a moment about your vegetable garden. Is there one change you would wish for your garden? Do you leave bare soil over the winter, which allow weeds to populate and have to deal with them in the spring? Do you have compacted soil that you want to improve, or perhaps some other issues? Think about where you might want to focus. Let's learn from some regenerative farmers. On this page are the names of 4 pioneering farmers who use cover crops. Gabe Brown is a leader in regenerative agriculture. He gardens in North Dakota, and he said the biggest benefit we're seeing from cover crops is the regeneration of our soil. The other 3 farmers grow in Oregon. If you click on their name, you can watch a short video talking about their experience with cover crop. Cover crops improve soil and the farmer's bottom line. According to a national survey, it shows after 5 consecutive years of cover cropping, farmers get higher yields in corn and soybean. For home gardeners, if we want a good harvest and also better soil for the next season, we should become regenerative gardeners by using cover crop in the rotation. As I organized this talk, I thought of a talent show of a sort. Gardeners face lots of problems in growing vegetables, and really we're auditioning cover crops to see which one have the best talent to help us with each of the problems. So today I'm going to talk about 8 problems that you might face in your vegetable gardening and provide some solutions for each one of them using cover crop. So problem number 1 is not enough organic matter in the soil. Let's have a quick review here. Organic matter feeds soil microbes, and microbes like fungi and bacteria hold the mineral particles, sand, silt, clay together to give soil structure. Good soil should have lots of space for air and water. Without that space, soil will not hold water, roots will not have air, and plants will not grow well. So microbes are important because they not only give soil structure, but they safeguard that space in soil particles. And they need organic matter as food to thrive. Cover crops such as those listed on this page, ryegrass, rye, vetch, a variety of other grasses, they can produce a lot of biomass, and you can add that biomass into the soil in order to increase the organic matter of your soil. And I want to clarify, generally cover crops are cut down and incorporated into the soil, but you can also cut them down and just lay them on top. Laying on top will lead to slower improvements. Nonetheless, it's a way to do it, and it's actually practiced in no-till farming. So today I think all know organic matter affects soil's water holding capacity. But You'll probably be surprised to find out that until 1994, which is only 30 years before now, soil scientists thought organic matter had little or no effect on the available water capacity of a soil. Then B.D. Hudson published this paper, and it changed everything. So let's take a look at some of the important terms before we talked about what his findings are. We should be familiar with available water holding capacity, which means water stored in the soil that's available for plants to use. And usually it's the amount of water between the water holding capacity, called field capacity, and the wilting point. So field capacity is how much water is held in the soil after it's saturated and the excess water has drained away. And wilting point is how much water is in the soil when the soil is not able to support the plant to stay firm, to have plant turgor, which means when they begin to wilt. So the difference between the field capacity and the wilting point is available water holding capacity, which is a really important thing. And Hudson re-examined other people's data, theories, and the interpretation of theories, and he put forth a very convincing argument showing a positive correlation between organic matter content and available water capacity. And he showed this relationship exists in all kinds of soil, sand, silt, or clay. And that leads to how organic matter and cover crop can improve our soil. So when we chop down the cover crop, we can incorporate it into soil, or we can use it as a mulch. When we incorporate, we get a faster result. But I have mentioned no-till farmers just chop and drop and use the plant residue as mulch. The slower breakdown still benefits soil. Okay, so winter wheat can do that very well. It is a good source of organic matter. It can cover the ground very quickly. It has strong roots to scavenge nitrogen and improve the soil structure. And you want to plant between mid-September to mid-October. Wheat is not as commonly grown as a winter cover crop as rye, but when you compare these two, wheat is more herbaceous, which means that the plant material will break down faster after it's cut. And it's also slower to go to seed, so it gives you a little more time in the spring before you have to kill it. Now, with every cover crop, if you allow them to go to seed, they can become a weed. So you always want to cut them down when they begin to flower. Let's look at another cover crop that can give your soil a lot of organic matter, and that's sorghum Sudan grass. It is a corn relative, an awesome grass that produces a huge amount of biomass. So it's a good solution to increasing soil organic matter. I've mentioned it's a relative of corn, so it likes heat, and it should be planted in mid-June to mid-July. And then you just watch it grow. It's a fast grower and can get to 6 to 12 feet. It's actually pretty awesome. And it also has really strong, thick roots that can penetrate deep into the soil to add additional benefit. All right, problem number 2 is hard pan in the soil. We know gardeners will use hand tools or machine to work the soil. And if you rototill to loosen the soil, repeated tilling to the same depth can give you a hard pan. Hard pan is also called plow pan, and it forms just below the depth of plowing. So this layer of compacted soil is difficult for roots or water to penetrate. And we need to break through this hard pan in order to fix the problem. Now you can buy a broad fork and work really hard to make vertical channels in the soil, but forage radish can also make vertical channels. You may already plant radishes as an early spring vegetable for salads, but to break up a hard pan, you would use forage radish and plant in late August to early September. Keep in mind, radishes are sensitive to changes in daylight. When you plant them in the fall, they're slow to bolt, but if you plant them in the spring, they will grow less roots and they will flower quickly. Forage radish, if you plant them in late August, they can grow quickly and compete well with weeds. Earlier planting and seeding at a lower density will give you larger plants and bigger radishes. But if you plant later in the fall or you seed them too densely, you'll get small plants, and the small plants are not going to do as much for your soil, but they're more winter hardy. If the cold temperature kill the radish, you just leave them in the ground to decompose, and then you end up with these big channels. And if they survive the cold, you'll terminate them before they go to seed. If your compacted area is not used during the summer month, I've shown you sorghum Sudan grass earlier. It is also a good candidate for penetrating deep into the soil. You would plant them in the summer. Remember, they're a corn relative, and you just watch them grow. They will outgrow weeds, and they will quickly reach 6 to 12 feet. And of course, again, you want to kill them before they go to seed. Problem number 3 for vegetable gardens, weeds. Where there is bare soil, there will be weeds. If you currently cover the ground with plastic when you're not growing, remember, plastic will cut off the air and is not good for the soil microbes. Or if you just leave soil bare and let weeds grow during that period and then have to do a big weeding job, you might consider trying some cover crops. The cover crops that excel in outcompeting weeds include those shown on the page: ryegrass, oats, clover, vetch. Let's take a closer look at oats. They're good at suppressing weeds. You want to plant them in late August and no later than early September. They should be irrigated to encourage rapid growth. By the way, all cover crops after seeding should get irrigation unless there's natural rainfall to allow good germination and growth. You'll want to get a good stand in the fall. And when the soil warms up in the spring, they can grow rapidly to increase the biomass. Oats are generally hardy in zone 8, but in colder areas, if you get a good stand going in the fall, even if they suffer winter kill, the mulch of the dead plant materials will still protect the soil and suppress the weeds. And buckwheat is a broadleaf plant that grows very quickly in warm weather, and they're also good for suppressing weeds during the spring, no more summer, during the summer month. You will want to plant them after the danger of frost has passed, generally around mid-May in the northern Willamette Valley. The good thing about buckwheat is they have a very short life cycle. They'll flower in about 30 days, go to seed in 40 days, and you can turn them under in between 1 month and 2 months. If you plant them late in the summer, well, in July, after days have begun to become shorter, they will flower before producing a whole lot of plant materials. As is the case with all cover crops, you want to terminate before they go to seed. With the buckwheat, you'll cut them down 7 to 10 days after the first bloom shows up. And you might know buckwheat flowers attract pollinators, predators, parasitoids, and many other beneficial insects, in addition to doing a good job in weed suppression in the summer. Okay, moving on to problem number 4, the need for nitrogen. Every winter, nitrogen leaches with rain, and every spring we need to add nitrogen to the garden. But we can grow our own nitrogen fertilizer. In fact, legume like clover, vetch, peas, and beans will fix nitrogen from the air and store it in the plants. And then when you cut down the legume cover crop and mix it into the soil, the nitrogen in the plant is released for the next crop to use. In order to fix nitrogen, legume relies on a symbiotic relationship with a soil bacteria called rhizobia. Rhizobia will infect the legume roots to fix nitrogen. If you grow legume, you want to verify that they're actually fixing nitrogen. So you will dig up the roots and check the root nodules. Look at the picture on the left shows the root nodules, and on the right, it shows the different nodules. The ones on the left side that shows red color, it means active nitrogen fixing. And the ones on the right that are white, or sometimes they can look greenish, it means that there's nothing going on, no nitrogen fixing. So don't assume just because you planted legume that they are fixing nitrogen. You should always inoculate your legume seeds with the correct rhizobia bacteria. This table shows how they match, which rhizobium species should be used for which legume group. And don't worry about the complexity, because if you buy your cover crop seeds from a reputable source, you can also buy the inoculant and they would provide the proper match for you. Now you might want to save some money and think, well, do I really need to inoculate? Well, think about these facts. First, the legume rhizobia relationship is very specific. So not all rhizobia, of which there are 238 species, can form nodules on all legumes. If a legume has previously been inoculated and grown in an area, the area is likely to have the correct rhizobia. Because rhizobia can survive in dormant state for many years, and they will form nodule once a legume is planted. But it takes about 1 million rhizobia cells per seed for effective nodulation to happen. So the soil has to have a huge population of rhizobia. Unfortunately, there is no easy way to test whether rhizobia is in your soil other than planting a legume and then checking the nodules and see what they look like. So even if a rhizobia is in your soil, here's the bad news. Bacteria evolve quickly. What you have may be the form that will best colonize plant roots to feed on root exudates, and maybe not the best form for fixing nitrogen. So this is just a really long way to say inoculate your legume with the recommended rhizobium strain. And keep one thing in mind. Research shows 60 Fahrenheit this is soil temperature, is the optimal temperature for nodules to form and the rhizobia to fix nitrogen. So if you're growing legume as part of a fall-winter cover crop, you want to get your plants well established and fixing nitrogen before the cold temperature comes. All right, we're going to quickly look at 4 legume cover crop candidates. Crimson clover is a top pick for nitrogen fixing in the Pacific Northwest maritime climate. It's a cool season annual, strong grower, stronger than the other clovers, but it does not compete well with weeds or with other cereal grasses that are often used as cover crop. So it's usually grown alone, or it could be grown with annual ryegrass. You would plant your clover seeds in early September, and they will grow well in the fall. Be sure to inoculate the seeds, and they are easy to terminate in the spring. Remember, they don't make a humongous amount of biomass, so it's easy to chop down and work into the soil or lay on top. So I would say this is a good candidate for somebody who's new to cover crops. It's also a good choice for areas where you want to plant early season vegetables next spring, just because, again, they're really easy to incorporate. Vetch is another annual cool season legume. You would plant vetch in late August to late September. They are good at producing biomass and fixing nitrogen, and their seeds also need to be inoculated. And I want to mention a word that's hard-seededness, and that is a phenomenon in vetch and clover. And hard-seededness just means physical dormancy when the seed coat becomes impermeable. It's a protective mechanism to delay germination until the environment is favorable. But it could be a problem if you allow them to go to seed, because they will wait until the right time to grow again in your garden. So with these plants that have hard seededness, you want to cut them down definitely before the seeds form. And but this characteristic is really favorable in terms of having self-reseeding cover crops. And in fact, they're used in almond orchards and vineyards that way. Fava beans and bell beans. I have grown fava beans for eating, and I love them. Fava bean is the name we give varieties with large seeds, and there are other varieties that have small seed are called bell beans. These beans will germinate at 41 Fahrenheit, which makes them a great candidate for areas that may not be ready for cover crop until early October. They're not reliably winter hardy. The bigger plants are easier to kill in the freeze, and the smaller plants are more likely to survive the winter. If you plant fava beans or bell beans as a summer cover crop, plant them in April or May, you'll get fast growth, and that will compete very well with weeds. Our final legume is Austrian winter pea. It's a cool season annual, good at fixing nitrogen, but it does not compete well with weeds. So generally, it will be mixed with some kind of an upright cereal grass like cereal rye. You plant them in September, and some of the varieties can produce edible peas in the spring, which makes me want to try it. All right, let's go on to problem number 5, nutrient leaching. Leached nutrient can contaminate groundwater, and the lost nutrient is a waste of money. A cover crop following the harvest can be the answer. Take a look at the illustration on the left. It shows 2 forms of nitrogen in soil: nitrate, NO3, and ammonium, NH4. Ammonium is attached to soil particles, so it does not leach easily. And nitrate comes from manure, fertilizer, or decomposed plant materials, and they leach very easily. At the end of the growing season, nitrate can leach into the groundwater or be lost through runoff. When it comes to leaching, rain affects leaching. More rain, greater potential for leaching. Soil's water holding capacity is another factor affecting leaching. Sandy soil cannot hold as much water as clay soil, and nitrate leaching happens more easily in sandy soil. To deal with this problem of leaching nitrate, you plant a cover crop that will scour the soil for nitrogen. And later on, when you kill the cover crop and return the plant debris to the soil, the nitrogen will go back into your soil for the next crop to use. And as shown on this slide, cereal rye and mustard are good examples of cover crop that will do the job. Let's take a closer look at cereal rye. It's a top pick for preventing nutrient leaching, and it's actually the most commonly grown grass cover crop in the US. It's a small grain, so don't confuse it with ryegrass. It should be planted in early September and irrigate until the rain comes. It's a cool season grass, grows well in low temperature, is winter hardy, and it does well in acidic soil. So it's good for west of the Cascades. It has many merits. We've talked about it will scavenge nitrogen to prevent leaching. It also quickly forms stand, and it will suppress weeds during the winter. It also has fibrous roots, which will promote soil drainage. And again, you will terminate it in the spring before it goes to seed. And most cover crops can be cut down with a weed whacker or a mower, depending on their height, or with hand tools. And I'll talk more about termination later. Okay, problem number 6 is soil erosion. We know bare soil, especially where there's a slope, can erode easily. And clover, rye, and a number of other cover crops are good solutions. I've already talked about clover as a nitrogen fixer, and it's also good for preventing soil erosion. Again, you want to plant it in the first half of September to get the best growth. And because it does not compete well with weeds or other cover crops, it's usually grown alone, but it also can be grown in a mixture with ryegrass. And barley is a great candidate to prevent soil erosion if you have alkaline soil. It's a winter annual. You want to plant at the end of August. In addition to fighting erosion, it's also good for suppressing weeds because it grows fast and scavenging nitrogen. The bloom time and height of barley matches with crimson clover and rape seeds when you use them in a mix. I think that sounds really lovely. Problem number 7, managing pests. Cover crops can solve pest problems in 2 ways. First, it can break the life cycle. If we can identify the disease or pest and know their life cycle, we can choose a cover crop to deprive that pathogen or the pest of what they need to survive. So this is a similar idea as crop rotation. The second way cover crops can deal with pest problems is with allelochemicals that are damaging to other plants. Probably everyone knows about walnut and jugalong. That's probably the most famous allelopathy example. In fact, all plants give off allelochemicals that can affect other plants' germination, growth, survival, and reproduction. These chemicals may be sent through root exudates into the soil. They could be washed off leaves and shoots by rain, or they can come from decomposing plant parts. And each allelochemical has different effects on different plants. So this is a very complicated subject area and an area of a lot of active research. But we do know, for example, cereal rye can inhibit dandelions and Canada thistle, and sorghum can suppress Bermuda grass and nutsedge. So I just talked about cereal rye works like a natural herbicide against dandelions and Canada thistle. But rye, like many other cover crops, they're very fast growers. And just through the fact of growing really fast, allow them to shade out other weeds. In fact, I'm going to mention a couple of research projects. There's one project in Maryland. The rye produced total weed right, reduced total weed density an average of 78% when residue of rye cover more than 90% of the soil. And this is a study in a no-till farming project. So the cover crops are not incorporated. They were just cut down and lay on top of the surface as mulch. And in a different research project in California, 99% reduction from rye incorporated into the soil in the reduction of weed density. I know 78% or 99%, they sound pretty impressive. And yeah, it's good, but it's not complete. So don't expect a miracle. Just keep in mind that cover crop will do a lot, but there will still be some weed left for you to deal with. And mustard also has important allelopathic effect on other plants. University studies have shown brassica green manure as a group have the ability to suppress many pathogens, including scab and verticillium in potatoes and Phytophthora in cucurbits. Mustard also reduce nematode populations and weed populations. And on the bottom of this slide is a link to a Washington State University publication, and it showed a study of a mustard arugula mix as cover crop in potato fields. So mustard works best as a biofumigant where heat can support growing a huge biomass, and then you cut down the plants, chop it up, and incorporate it into the soil. You can plant mustard in July to early August for fall growing, or you can plant in early June as a short season summer cover crop. Now, back to the idea of crop rotation. You will only use mustard as a cover crop where the next vegetable is not a brassica. I know you might get excited so far thinking, whoa, mustard sounds pretty awesome. Well, there are every cover crop has its benefits and also potential downside. So here's the bad news. Mustard can host club root. You're probably familiar with that. They just create these deformed roots in root vegetables. And blackleg. Blackleg is a new disease that has come into Oregon and Washington. It's a fungal pathogen that can live 4 years in infected seeds and 3 years in affected plant residue. The main infection period is fall and winter when it's cold and wet. And the winter brassicas are a vulnerable host. So in Oregon and Washington, in order to help manage this new disease, the states are requiring all brassica seeds that are intended for planting should show a negative test result for blackleg. But if you go to your garden center and look at seed packet, I don't think many of them indicate whether these seeds have been tested. So if you grow brassica from seeds, make sure you ask and verify that you're not going to bring blackleg through these seeds into your garden soil because they're tremendously difficult to get rid of. Okay, problem number 8, not enough pollinators. I first learned about Phacelia from Oregon State University Garden Ecology Lab study. That study showed Phacelia is loved by native bees. Another study by University of Minnesota showed that Phacelia and buckwheat, remember we talked about buckwheat, the short life cycle summer cover crop, attracted the highest number and most diverse insects. And Phacelia was super popular with native sweat bees, hoverflies, and minute pirate bugs. So Phacelia is something that I would highly recommend incorporating in your cover crop rotation so you can diversify your garden ecosystem. Phacelia is a relative of borage. You would plant it in late September to early October. They're easy to grow and easy to terminate because they have hollow stems. Actually, they break really easily in a hard freeze, and they may not reliably survive the winter if you grow them north of Salem, Oregon. But still, they have a lot of benefit. I think it's worth trying. So I'm done with showing you the variety of cover crops and how they match with addressing different kinds of problems in a vegetable garden. And I hope you have gained some new ideas for maybe how cover crops can work for you. So let's go through some strategies for using cover crops. Where might you grow them? Well, anywhere where there's bare soil. What might you grow? Well, you can try a single species, or you can try a multiple species mix. You can buy them easily from seed stores, nurseries, and farm stores. And when might you grow cover crops? Well, to cover the soil during fall and winter, you would grow cool season cover crops. And if you have bare soil during the warmer month, you can use warm season cover crops. So let's look at some examples. If you grow vegetables like tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, squash, from May to September, and then the rest of the year you don't grow anything, you can get a cover crop mix that is designed for fall, winter growing. Plant them in September, get them water and established, and then next spring, 2 to 4 weeks before you plant your vegetables, come back, kill the cover crop, mix them into the soil or lay them on top as mulch, and your garden is ready for the next season of growing. So see, it's not that hard. You can also use cover crop for a short period. And let's say you grow different kinds of vegetables and you have bare soil for 2 months in the middle of summer, like in this example, you can use a warm season cover crop to fill the gap. So let's look at this example. It shows we grew peas March through May. They're done. And then we come back in August to putting a fall crop of kale. And we have bare soil in June and July. Well, there are all these warm season cover crops, buckwheat, vetch, mustard, sorghum, Sudan grass. They're all good candidates to fill that 2-month window. Remember that buckwheat can have a really short life cycle, so they're easy to manage, and they have pollinator benefits. Vetch can fix nitrogen, mustard can kill soil pest, and sorghum Sudan grass is that really tremendous looking corn relative that generates huge biomass to improve your organic matter content in the soil. All right, what if you have bare soil during the spring? Let's say you overwintered some kale and you harvested them in early March, and then you're not going to come back and plant in that area until June for your pumpkins or other squash. So you have March, April, May, open window. Well, you can use a cool season cover crop to fill the gap. Barley, cereal rye, winter wheat, and oats, they all germinate in low soil temperature, 35 to 45 degrees, and they can protect the soil during this short window and also suppress weeds. Then you simply cut down the cover crop, lay them on top as mulch, and plant squash right into the same soil. So far I've shown you some simpler, easy examples because I don't want you to feel that it's complicated and difficult to start. So in those examples, I show you alternating cover crop and vegetables. But some of you may already be using cover crops, and so I want to give you something a little more adventurous, and that's relay seeding, which means planting cover crops when the vegetable is still growing. And this approach will work best if the vegetable is vigorous and the cover crop is low and fast growing. So for relay sowing, the good grass choices are winter oats, cereal rye, and annual ryegrass. And the good legume choices are common vetch and crimson clover. So let's look at the two examples shown on the screen. Let's say you planted carrots in August and they are pretty well established by October, but you're not going to harvest them. You're going to leave them in the ground until, December or later to harvest. Well, you can interplant hairy vetch into this carrot stand in October, and the vetch will keep the ground covered until next spring. Or let's say you planted eggplant in May and you harvest them in September, and you want to have a cover crop already pretty well established in that area. And since eggplant canopy usually will leave areas underneath that is not shaded, you can use common vetch and plant interseed common vetch 2 months later in July. And the common vetch will keep the ground covered until next spring. So the benefit of doing this intercropping is you give the cover crop time to grow, where you grow late season vegetable and they're harvested late. The general rules in this situation is you want to sow your cover crop 1 to 2 weeks before the vegetable canopy shades too much of the soil. And the cover crops, after they're sown, they need irrigation. And you'll have to use overhead irrigation because that will spread the water in the entire area. Drip irrigation will not do. And if you are planting fall vegetable crops like spinach, carrots, or broccoli, it is best to sow your relay cover crop after the vegetable crop has become pretty well established, because otherwise they'll be competing against each other. And in that instance, you're generally seeding your cover crop between mid-August and late September, depending on what you use as a cover crop. So let's kind of bring things together and talk about sowing. If you're growing cover crop for fall and winter, you're planting seed in late summer into early fall in general. And if you want to cover the soil for spring and summer, you're planting in late spring into summer. If you're planting in the spring, obviously you want to do it only when the soil is workable. And of course, for both seasons, watering to get good seed germination and strong development until rain comes is important. Now, you may be planting into an area where the crop is done. In that instance, you will prepare the bed by removing the mulch and the crop residue. You'll loosen the top 1 inch of soil, not deeper, just a shallow scratching, and then sow the seeds. If the crop is not done, you can just scratch the top 1 inch of the soil around the crop and sow into that. As long as there's opening in the canopy of the crop, the seeds will develop and grow. So this picture shows that I sowed in mid-September. It's a bit late for this mixture of cover crops. And 10 days after sowing, they started growing. It was very exciting. And I'm going to take you through step by step sowing seeds. Cover crops are seeded directly into the soil. And when you do the soil preparation, you do not want to till it because tilling will turn up the weed seeds, and it also will work the soil too deep. So you end up planting your cover crop seeds too deep. But to prepare the soil, you want to remove the stubbles and plant residue, scratch the top layer of the soil surface shallowly. I just use a rake to kind of rough up the soil surface. And you broadcast seed. I usually will walk one direction while I'm broadcasting by hand, and then I'll do the opposite direction, and that will give me more even distribution of the seeds. If you use a mixture of seeds and they vary a lot in size, it's better if you sow the different sizes separately, and that way you'll get more even distribution. You can improve the contact between seed and soil by gently pressing a piece of wood into it and water it well. The watering will also help improve the contact with soil. You'll keep it water to get good germination and growth until rain comes. And how do you kill them? When I talk to gardeners about growing cover crops, their biggest fear seems to be, how do you get rid of them in the spring? It's actually pretty simple. You just cut them down. You can cut them down with a machine like a weed whacker or a mower, depending on their height, or you can cut them with hand tools. And I've just used that kind of a long trimmer hand tool to cut my cover crop. But you can also use a sickle, and, lots of different tools are available for that. And what do you do with the stuff you cut down? We've talked about it. You can mix it into the soil, or you can leave it on top of the soil as a mulch. But you always want to terminate before they go to seed, because earlier termination will give you, even though it'll give you less biomass, less quantity, but the succulent tissue in your cover crop will help it decompose more quickly. And if you're new to cover crop, that's a good thing. If you wait to cut them down, you'll get more biomass, but they're going to take longer to break down. So let's talk about when is a good time to cut down a cover crop. As a rule, late vegetative and early flowering stages, best time to cut them down. And it's best because this way you will optimize the nitrogen contribution from the cover crop. At these stages, the late vegetative, so there are still leaves, but flowers are not showing yet, or early flowering when they're just beginning to flower. These stages, you get a good balance between the maximum amount of biomass and good amount of nitrogen content. So let's talk about two terms, immobilization and mineralization. If a cover crop has a low nitrogen content, such as those above the highlighted line that's called ideal microbe diet, do you see that? Okay. So microbe will use nitrogen from the soil if there is not enough nitrogen in the cover crop as they break down the crop residue. And when they use up the nitrogen from soil, there is nothing for plants. And this is called immobilization. If a cover crop has a high nitrogen content, then microbes will use the nitrogen in the plant to break down the plant residue and release surplus nitrogen as a plant fertilizer, and this is called mineralization. In cover crop tissue, 2% nitrogen is the sweet spot between mineralization and immobilization. We've talked about the legume cover crops. They have 2 to 4% nitrogen in the plant tissue. And we also talked about a lot of non-legume cover crops. They typically have 1 to 2% nitrogen in the plant tissue. In all of these plants, the nitrogen content will drop to the lower end of the range as the plant mature and go to seed. So let's take a look at an example in this table. The rye cover crop in the vegetative stage, which means that it's just ryegrass, no sign of flowers, definitely no seeds. It's got a good carbon nitrogen content that's pretty close to the ideal micro diet. When they begin to flower, more carbon, less nitrogen. And when they are in the straw form, they're mostly carbon and very low nitrogen. So this is why we recommend cutting down the cover crops when they begin to flower. Okay, let's recap. Getting started, start with a simple plan. Begin with why. Do you have hard pan, weed problem, want more organic matter, erosion, whatever it is, pick something to focus on. And where do you have bare soil? And once you figure out the why and where, the what and when will follow. You may consider trying a cover crop that's easy to grow and manage. I've given you some examples like crimson clover, rye vetch mix. They're all very reliable and easy to work with. You'll want to add one cover crop into the crop rotation before getting more complicated. For example, if you only grow summer vegetables, work a fall-winter cover crop into that. And then you can build on your success and experiment with more complicated ways of using cover crops. We talked about grasses. They generate huge biomass, suppress weeds, have deep roots, can scour nitrogen. And we talked about legume. They can fix nitrogen. And we also talked about other potential cover crop that you can work into the mix. And key days for cover cropping, if you want to use them to cover the soil fall and winter, you're sowing mid-August to mid-September, and you're terminating before the flower begin. And you can also grow summer cover crops. And I give you a number of options: fava beans, crimson clover, buckwheat, and sorghum Sudan grass. And you would sow them at different times depending on the variety. Well, I know that was a lot of information, and here is more information for read about cover crops. And I want to point out the first item on this page. It's a 10-minute university handout, only 2 pages. And if you don't want to read anything long, that's your go-to one. And I used examples of, I noticed a typo here. West of the Cascade, it says wet of the Cascades. So if you're east of the mountains, there's a special publication that shows choices for your area west of the Cascade, additional choices, and many of which we've talked about. So I'm going to stop here. Oh, and don't worry about writing down all these things. You'll get a recording in 2 days, and you'll also get all the resources mentioned with the recording.
Hi, Sherry.
I've done such a good job. I'm sure there's no question left, huh?
Actually, we do have a few.
Ah,
People are really confused about the inoculants,
okay.
and a few of them want to know, are you saying every vegetable seed needs to be inoculated, or do I do just my peas and my beans, like my sugar snap peas, or are you just talking about cover crop inoculation?
Okay. If you want your legume plants, that's peas, beans, vetch, clover, to fix nitrogen really well, you want to inoculate the seeds.
Okay.
If you're
Okay. So
growing peas, if you're growing peas and beans for eating, you should inoculate them because they will do much better at fixing nitrogen. But, they'll still grow and you'll still get peas and beans. But if you're growing a cover crop for nitrogen fixing in order to add nitrogen to your soil, that's job number one. Then you definitely want to inoculate in order to make sure job number one is done. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does to me. It
Yeah.
does. Now, some people also want to know, how do you exactly inoculate these things? Is this powder? Is it Granules? What
Yeah,
is the,
they actually inoculants come in different forms. And I know when I've purchased inoculants before, I'll look in the nursery catalog, I'll buy my pea seeds and bean seeds, and I'll get the inoculant that's specified for them. And the mix usually is a powdery thing, and actually the direction is on it, on the packet. And the varieties I've had always, you just add water, you make a slurry with this inoculant, then you just soak the seeds in it to make sure that there's good coverage, and then you plant them. It's
oh,
pretty easy.
that sounds quite easy. Okay. Also, Leah says that she has raised beds, and next year in 2025, she knows she's going to have to add more soil into her beds. So she's wondering, is it a good idea to put a cover crop in this winter, then then terminate it in the fall in next spring, and then add more soil on top of it then?
You know,
Or
I would think of one using cover crop as a way to add bulk because they not only add organic matter, but it's stuff that will make your soil actually, a bigger volume as they're breaking down. So that's a
yes.
good thing. So I would grow stuff that's really good source of organic matter because they have huge biomass. And then secondly, back to the question of, if she's want to add more soil, yeah, just, cut down the cover crop and mixed it in with the soil, the old soil and the new stuff that she add in.
Okay, okay. And one other question, and I can't remember how you pronounced it, that cover crop, cilia, the PHA.
Facilia,
Yeah.
yeah.
And you talked about how um the beneficial insects love it, but then you say to terminate before things flower, and it's kind of confusing about, well, I want the beneficials to use it, but I don't want them to use it because I need to get rid of it before it goes to seed. So you just, how long do you wait?
Yeah, I mean, flower is different from seed, right? So
Right.
you can have flowers, but you need to watch for seed formation. Usually seeds begin to form after the flower is almost done. And the
Right.
tricky thing about growing a huge stand of the same flowering cover crop is, in the same population, maybe 10% will be really early bloomers and they'll start blooming. And then maybe, that you'll see 50% of them are blooming and you think, oh, that looks really pretty. And then you think, oh no, maybe the early bloomers are already going to seed. And that's when begin to cut them down. So I would say if you're growing buckwheat or Phacelia, which has beneficial um, insect values,
Pollinators. Yeah.
yeah, you're really balancing that. You're
Okay.
monitoring, when did they start to bloom and how long have they been blooming? And pretty quickly you begin to notice, okay, there are not a whole lot of flowers anymore, which means most of them have gone to seed. Then you'll really need to make sure that you cut them down. I've grown buckwheat as a summer cover crop, and I can tell you that's a tricky one to cut down because some of them just start blooming so quickly. It's kind of
Okay.
always catch me by surprise. And
Okay.
so I always end up with some buckwheat coming up again. But the beauty is these things are pretty easy to manage. It's really not much of a hassle. And I kind of like, a few stray buckwheats in the garden because they attract beneficials and it's kind of fun to see. So it kind
Okay.
of depends on, whether it's a strong cover crop, you don't want it to go to seed and become a horrible weed,
Right.
or these kind of dainty things like buckwheat, Phacelia, crimson clover, it's kind of, I think I can manage it. And that comes with experience.
Okay. We also, I think there were also a couple people that are confused because like one person wanted to know about what cover crop to put when she just planted new raspberries, and someone else wanted to know about cover crops to put within their asparagus. So I think they're a little confused about um, a cover crop means in bare soil. That's what you want a cover crop for, not where you're growing other things. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Well, actually, there are cover crops used in permanent cover crops used in vineyards. So they grow as companion to vine,
But is that growing
grapes,
between the vines
but they're
though?
not. They're grown usually in strips between
Right.
the grapes. And there are also cover crop strips, permanent ones in, like a variety of orchards. And so you can grow them that way, but it's difficult to use cover crop by intercropping with your perennial um, plants like asparagus. I know I grow asparagus and I try not to disturb their root zone because
Right.
you're basically cutting off the roots.
Yeah.
Once in a while, I think, yeah, maybe I can try cover cropping, some kind of veg, like common veg is not a very strong grower, or like crimson clover, it's not a very strong grower. So maybe I can do a cover crop there. And then I just kind of cut them down, with my hand tools, because as I'm harvesting the asparagus, I have to cut them down in order to be able to see the asparagus coming up. Um, and I would not turn them over. I would just leave them in the ground. So if I grow annuals in those areas, in theory, before they go to seed, if you cut down the top, it should be okay. So that would be kind of a fun thing to experiment.
Okay. But the other thing in those two situations to help keep control weeds would be some other type of mulch
Yeah,
also.
but yeah, definitely. But I think one of these days I'm going to try some common veg in the asparagus field. The tricky thing about intercropping in the perennial areas is, think about your raspberries, they're growing with huge canopies in the summer, and that canopy doesn't go away until pretty late in the season. So it's tricky to get a cover crop established because there's no light. I mean, you can water, but you're not going to get the sunlight penetrate through the canopy. And that's the same thing with asparagus. So it's kind of tricky, and I haven't quite figured out a solution yet.
Okay. That sounds good. Well, that's all the questions we had. So thank you, Sherry. That was a lot of really good information, and I am going to use cover crop this year on mine.
Well, that's wonderful. Happy to hear that. And yeah, just keep growing. And let's see, next week we're talking about growing vegetables year round. So
Yeah.
we hope to see everybody again.
Thank you, Sherry. Great job.
Bye.